I'd like to thank everybody for having me here today. You know, I just kind of was looking at some notes. Do people ever, anybody here ever watch Star Trek? You know, The Next Generation? Do you ever remember the one where Guinan is on the bridge of the Enterprise and everything shifts to a different universe, and she's the only one who realizes we're not supposed to be here? You know, sometimes I like to say, you know, if you think about what this country is supposed to be and where we're at, we're not supposed to be here. And I think it's really important, you know, and I think about, you know, because we live in America, you read something in the New Testament like princes and principalities not putting your faith in that, you realize, well, that doesn't concern us because it's America. And all of a sudden one day in summer you're sitting back and you're thinking about it and you say, or maybe it does. And maybe it does. Okay? So I like to think about that. We were talking about, you know, giving these flip talks about Sharia being cheesecake. It's like Sharia for these cheesecake. Increasingly I do this, and you do this, and you realize that you go through this trial and error of getting the message out right, and then you go through the trial and error of bringing it down to people in an audience, and then you realize that if you give it, people get it. So you realize you're doing something right. You realize you're getting nowhere. And that's the point at which you have to basically say there's something else going on. You know, this is not just about what we're seeing in this very well-presented brief. What's the issue? The issue that you have these rape gangs, or the fact that law enforcement is intentionally not enforcing it? And at what point does that begin to impact, you know, that oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic? At what point do we have to step back from this issue, which, believe me, is deadly serious, and start understanding that there's another issue here that is part of this game? The problem is, you have our national law enforcement, our national security people hearing this nonsense, and they are allowing that nonsense. It's a narrative, right? They're allowing this narrative to overwrite their oath to support and defend the Constitution. And at some point, we have to start taking cognizance of that. We have to start to say, this is about that, as well as whatever else we're talking about. Does that sound fair? Okay, so I had dinner with some people last night after my travails of Detroit. And I was talking this morning, and I'm going to kind of short circuit part of what I'm going to do to go to something I talked about last night that I brought up this morning after 2 slides. Now, I'm a big Viking fan. I grew up there. And this is just something, how many people saw the Diggs play at the last second? And I just like this commercial because it said, if you make promises during the last 10 seconds, you better show up to church tomorrow. Kind of like, you know, for all those Viking fans who were praying, and then it happened. And so I always thought that was kind of funny. But then I want to take a look at this. Create change, an ad by the U.S. NFL Players Association and Microsoft. Do you understand change is part of a progressive narrative? Do you understand that when that's being taught, it's being taught to change from what? Well, to change from you. Okay? And are they deadly serious? Well, just go to people who are increasingly being attacked, not just by Islamic thugs, but Islamic thugs who are working hand in hand with left-wing thugs, Antifa. And then start to ask, is it the 15th time or the 1,000th time that we saw that happen, that that's not a coincidence? We've all seen this slide, right? Everybody knows what it is. And of course, the first thing Alinsky says is he's not a Marxist. And I'll say I think he's a Gramsci Marxist, okay? About taking control of the population by taking control of the narrative. And you know, we all hear that saying, the long march through the institutions. He didn't actually say that, one of his proteges did. He didn't really say long march through the institutions. He said the long march through the Christian institutions. Because if you take a look at what the Freemasons were saying, and then you take a look at what the Marxists were saying, we have a bridge there because we have someone named Leon Trotsky who actually trained Freemason tactics to the early Marxists, because we have them writing about that, is that they said that their job wasn't to destroy the Christian church. Their job was to take it over and get control of the pulpits. And so I just do these thought pieces and I say, well, if their doctrines, if what they wanted to teach was going to look like, well, what would it look like? Well, gosh, you know what? The Marxists were publishing something in the 1930s in America called The Protestant. So, you know what? If you're the average person, guess what? You wouldn't know. And that's what they wanted to be taught. So the question I ask in this thought piece is, if we're looking at the major denominations today, does it look like what Methodists, Catholics, evangelicals, conservative Jews were saying in the 1930s? Or is it looking like what the communist Comintern said? And at a certain point, do we have to start revisiting that point? Because Saul Alinsky, we categorize as a Marxist, but guess what? When he made his homage to Lucifer, I think when he talked about his dedication to Lucifer, I also think he was referring to a man named Karl Marx. How many people know that Karl Marx wrote this way? That he was dedicating himself to Lucifer. I just think that's kind of interesting, don't you? So I was trying to explain to people why it is, conservatives in Washington, why it is that the Republican leadership goes with the left because they want to. And so I created this visual picture. This will take only about 5 minutes. What you see here is a trimaran, right? A boat. You have the right outlier. We'll say those are conservatives, Republicans, branded that way. And you have the left outlier, the Democratic progressive, and you have people in the middle. And they're floating down this river. And grafted on top of it is this normal curve in statistics. Because what you'll find is when they have these huge elections where Tea Party people get elected because they got elected on what you got them elected for, which gave Republicans a majority in Congress, which put a president in office, which means that everything you're concerned about today should have been taken care of by April, right? And it didn't. In fact, all the concessions you made, all the concessions our leaders said they had to make to get the Democrats on board, hasn't been effective to give the Democrats everything they wanted, and you still have what? Nothing. And this briefing was given first in 2015 to say, you're always going to get, because that's what you get. So the point is, when you've been fooled once, you're a victim. But when you've been fooled twice, what are you? You're a fool. Okay? So this is an attempt to explain what we're seeing. I'm not asking you to change how you view this. Like, do threat analysis. Like, 70% of me disagrees with this, but I'm going to leave open seeing things, and I'll apply this 30% of the time, the 30% solution. And at the end of the year, I'm going to tell you why this is either right or wrong. But if it turns out that it kind of works, what I'm asking is shift the way you think about it. Okay? So here it is. These Tea Party people get elected, or these people who got elected on border and Obamacare, and they go and they meet the leadership. They say, you're part of the extreme 8%. What's the extreme 8%? Well, on the normal curve, that's the farthest outlier piece on there. Okay, so what they're telling people when they get them to flip in Washington is that they're part of the extreme 8%, despite the fact that that's what put them in power. That's the first thing to realize. So what I want to show here is this boat is going down, and the prevailing way we think about it is the river is center moderates, center left Democrats, center right Republicans. What if that was then? And what if we're coming to a division in the river, we're coming to a break in the river, and there is a break, there is no middle, and on the left is cultural Marxism, globalism, undermining national sovereignty, multiculturalism, diversity, the racism, sexism, homophobia issue, to which the Brotherhood 1988 managed to include Islamophobia, so that the left would do its heavy lifting. Okay? Political correctness, the destruction of identity, the demand that you say 2 + 2 = 5, or you can lose your job. Okay? And on the right side is the Constitution, rule of law, national sovereignty, individual rights, reason. And let's just say right here there's rocks, so that if you stay in the middle, what are you going to do? You're going to hit the... Do you feel like we're sailing down the issues that we put people in power to do, or do you think we're hitting the rocks? Just putting it out there. Okay? So here it is. Now remember, agreeing with this means that you're here. It's an absolute position. You see what I'm saying? You're here or you're not. The people who are on the right, trimaran, believe they're more conservative because they're all more conservative than the people in the rest of the boat. But then it becomes a relativist concept of being conservative, does it not? I can tell you I'm more conservative because I fought with the Democratic leadership all the time. The center of the boat went that way. So what if the center line of the mean of the ship has been aligned to those hostile narratives while our perceptions don't account for it? What if What if the entire national debate has been realigned to that same narrative while our perceptions do not account for it? So all I'm saying is the conservative becomes a relative term, and it's going down that road. And we just saw legislation passed that makes it that way. So since the election, the leadership has, this is from 2015, since the election, hasn't the leadership been trying to shear off the ultra-conservatives, the ones who have the issues that get them elected? Okay? Okay. While conservative members have been battling the same leadership over the hearts of the party, think about words that work. You know, every 2 years, the Republican leadership, they go and they have a retreat, and they do the words that work from Frank Luntz. But what if the words that work are the words that work based on the prevailing cultural narrative? The prevailing cultural narrative is cultural Marxism. Well, couldn't you make an argument that the minute you decide to subordinate conservative ideas to words that work based on a kind of a neo-Marxist political correctness, that you've subordinated what you believe to those ends? And at that point, you will always be more afraid of being called a racist, sexist, and homophobe than of supporting and defending the Constitution? I just put that out there because I think it's one of those things to think about and starting to say, when we see things go sideways, the way we're seeing it go sideways on everything, I just think at a certain point, we have to start saying it's going sideways. And so we're back into the main brief. Does that make sense? Yeah. Think about the trimaran and say, well, that would be conservative from a person on the boat. But then if the boat's heading that direction, are they really conservative? Okay. And if you're holding on to that lifeline, what are you being dragged into? The rocks. Okay? At what point, if you're on the right of that trimaran, and, well, I'll stop there, because okay, all I'm trying to say is, stop and analyzing by what you hear them say and start drawing a hard line on what they did. And when you realize you can't reconcile the one with the other, you have to make a choice. Some of you think you'll make the right choice, and some of you won't, because you say, I'm okay with that, you know, because we're in those days right now where this is no longer something that's getting pushed off. So I'm going to bring this up. We're going to go into Islam, but I'm going to go talk about a couple other things, and this will be a little bit saucy here. I apologize for it, but my point is, if you're a confessing mother with children and you don't go here, then don't be surprised that you lost your daughters and your sons, because this is where the game is. The Frankfurt School. I'm going to give one quote from a larger brief. This is a book that came out in 1965 called Tolerance. This is the definition of tolerance that controls political thinking in all universities. Liberating tolerance then would mean intolerance against movements from the right and totalitarian movements from the left. Withdrawing tolerance from regressive movements before they can become active. Intolerance even towards thought, opinion, and word, and finally intolerance in the opposite direction. Do you see that intolerance by this guy named Marcuse, who was a member of the Frankfurt School? This definition of tolerance is actually its opposite. Do you see who it's directed at? Do you see this has been directed at you since 1965? If you have this definition of tolerance in your pocket when you hear people talk about tolerance and you use it when you hear them and it makes more sense, start understanding that that's what you're being told. So this is the saucy part. Frankfurt School writes it down by the greater transition to privileges conferred by the state and made pervasive in popular culture. So here's a guy, this is a book. If you could get a book to read on the Frankfurt School that you don't have to do a lot of the theoretical thinking, it's a book called Crime Memo. And it came out in 2007. But I just want to talk about one part of cultural Marxism, something by Wilhelm Reich. And I'm going to I will read these paragraphs to you, the important part, because I want to understand that what you're seeing that you don't like is directional. This is not accidental. This is from stuff that was going on in the 1930s, actually 1920s as well. Critical theory attacked the family, religion, education, morality in no particular order, but the first onslaughts on the family, a sustaining unit of society, were through sexual morality, sex education, and radical feminism. The Institute's point man on this was Wilhelm Reich. The Reichian philosophy of sex ascribed to it a force which would rescue society from the repressiveness of moral codes which frowned on promiscuity, adultery, lesbianism, pedophilia, juvenile fornication, and male homosexuality. Since these prohibitions stemmed partly from religion, they were doubly evil to them, and they had to be attacked. So, children who pray do not masturbate, and children who masturbate do not pray. Make sense? Masturbation therefore served as a double purpose, sexual and anti-religious, but masturbation was not conceived simply as a sex expression. Along with lesbianism, it became part of a feminist mystique to be encouraged and upgraded. All I'm trying to say is there's nothing random about what you're seeing going on, and there is directionality from it, and it comes from a group that are self-defined as Marxists. I didn't say this about them. They wrote books on this. And think about when I say, and you don't know this, I want you to understand, I'm not saying, you don't know this. I'm saying, how is it this stuff is ubiquitous in a world in front of us and is opaque to everybody unless they're in it? Okay? So I like to look at that because then we take a look at Wonder Woman this summer, and this is a picture of them on a boat at dark, and they're having a discussion. And all of a sudden, she's talking about how people this is not your mother's Wonder Woman, right? She says, they came to the conclusion that men are essential for procreation, but when it comes to pleasure, unnecessary. Now, I left out the more graphic quote from the book Cry Havoc of what they were saying, but it matches up exactly with this. My point is, this stuff is in entertainment. It goes so far as to say, if you're hearing, technology companies have advertisements where they're saying everybody gets our technology and they can all be Mozart. When Fred down the block who lives in the basement, who dropped out of school, considers himself a Mozart, and you're required to say it, you know what you don't have in society anymore? You don't have any Mozarts anymore. If you get everybody to think they're great, guess what? You've destroyed the concept of greatness. You bring people to the verge of disbelief. So do you ever get the feeling that our history is, who listened to me last night? Who was there? Okay. Do you ever start to realize when you're talking to your kids, if you're my age and they're like 18 to 24, that if you try to talk about American history, they don't even understand what you're saying? Do you understand that that is a non-random event? Okay? That's a non-random event. Okay? That the very way we talk about America is foreign to your children. Okay? And they think you're weird. Okay? No, I'm saying weird, but there's some hostility to that phrase weird. Okay? We're lost and incoherent, and we don't even understand that we are incoherent in our own world. We're defending ourselves in our own home turf. So, let me just say this. Political correctness is the enforcement mechanism of the postmodern narrative, diversity, multiculturalism, which implements cultural Marxism. If you decide you're going to premise your agenda in Washington on the words that work, and the words that work are take a knee to political correctness, you are taking a knee to this. Does that mean that they know in the long war they're going to win? When you're in your church and they're going to talk about having a diversity, whatever, in their church, do you understand one of them's going to win and one of them's not? That narrative? It's not that it kind of has the effect of destroying faith. It seeks to do it. It doesn't do it by having you go to a meeting at 5 and walk out turned upside down. It has you turn over a period of 10 years where you don't even realize that this isn't what you were trained in your, I'm Catholic, or Bible study for Protestant. You don't even realize that what you were taught as a child has been turned completely upside down. And to the extent that you're made to reflect in it in this language, you're made to think that that was weird. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? So I'm saying, as important as Islam is, and it is important, as the Muslim Brotherhood imposes what they're doing, this is actually, I'm as concerned about the fact that this language gets people to pretend that they're supporting defending the Constitution of the United States, when in fact they have no intention of doing it, because they don't even know that they're not doing it. More importantly, if you get into this whole cycle, and I'm stopping myself going further on a certain point because it would cascade, you don't even believe in the concept of truth, so you're not even fazed that other people might say that you're using the L word. What's the L word? Lying. Okay? So, we talk about how we've lost control of our language. This is a prestigious counterterrorism magazine in the international community. Look at this. They got it right. Al-Qaeda, Taliban, Boko Haram, ISIS, they constitute 66% of the terrorists in the world. They know that. Guess what we know? Every one of them, guess what they all have in common? They all say they fight jihad according to Islamic law to implement Islamic law. Now, to those people you might run into and say, well, my jihad is not eating cheesecake. My answer is, well, from a national security point of view, that's not our job to go into those versions of Islam. I don't care about that. We'll get into we can argue and win whether that's true, but that's not our concern. If only 10% of the Muslim world define jihad as war against non-Muslims to establish the religion, which is what it says in Reliance of the Traveler, which is sold in the same mosques, bookstores that these people are talking from, and that's why people killing Americans are killing them, that's the definition we have to go to, because that's the definition that's a national security threat. And if you decide you're not going to look at that because someone came in and said, well, my jihad is eating cheesecake, well, you have just decided to subvert your oath to support and defend the Constitution, have you not? I think people have to get mad about that. I think people have to say, as a matter of fact, I'm trying to think of the word, what was it, what rape? I think people start getting angry that they're being told it's no-fault rape. That's right. Really? Okay? So, because if you take a look, this same article got into, well, why do they do this? Why are these top three groups fighting jihad? Well, it's all this nonsense. Well, we have to get the sociological drivers and the feelings of disenfranchisement. So even when they're forced to have to say that 66% of terrorism comes from people who explicitly state what they do, the first thing our national leaders do, or international leaders on terrorism do, is they redefine it in a made-up language, a made-up sociology, made-up anthropology, pseudoscience. I'll use the word Gnosticism for some people here who know what that is. I can't go into it here. But that's what it is. It's Gnosticism. And the Christianity that comes out of it is Gnosticism. How many people think I'm joking when I used to say that metaphorically. The more I look at it, the more I say, I'm not too sure it's a metaphor. So, Al-Qaeda 2.0. This is an article that came out in 2005 in Der Spiegel. This man spent 2 years in jail with a leader of ISIL. His name was Zarqawi. He's now dead. Okay? And the whole discussion was about what Al-Qaeda was planning on doing, what their plan was. And so he wrote an article in 2005. That is now, 13, 14 years ago? I'm having a hard time doing math. Remember, I spent a whole day at an airport yesterday. So from his being in jail in 2002, Al-Qaeda said what their timeline was. Phase 4, 2010, 2013, Al-Qaeda will aim to bring about the collapse of the hated Arab republics. Did they not do that and call it the Arab Spring? I was on Capitol Hill in 2010 warning by name and by country how it was going to happen. Oh no, Steve, it's a human rights movement. They're smart enough to get all the English-speaking liberal Egyptians on the street to go to you, the media, on Tahrir Square and get you to listen to that while Brotherhood's maintaining an op. We could show how Al-Qaeda ordered it. We could show how Badi, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, said it was coming. And we could prove that they said it ahead of time and show how it was going to play out. We did. Okay? But my point is, 7 years after that 2002 interview, that event happened exactly on time. Egypt fell, Syria went to civil war, it started in, I think, Algeria. They did exactly what they said they were going to do. Phase 5. This is the point at which the Islamic State or Caliphate can be declared, 2013. Did ISIS declare the Islamic State in 2013? Did ISIS declare the Caliphate in 2013? Okay? Are they on time? Then they said phase 6 starts in 2016, and I was writing in November that we should expect to see this in November, and it will look like this, and boom. We had what happened in San Bernardino, we had what happened in Orlando, but most importantly, we had what happened in Paris. That's more important because that had all the pieces in play. Okay? And it was December. And the way the calendar works, that kind of qualifies for 2016. So what I want to basically point out is Al-Qaeda from 2002 or ISIS today is exactly where they said they would be. And now they're calling for the total confrontation. As we see ISIS demanding the slitting of throats in America and aligning themselves with groups like Antifa in America, okay, and we're seeing this violence loom, and we're seeing the non-prosecution of these people, are we starting to understand that they're still on time? starting with that. So they're exactly where they said they would be when our leaders and our media said, Al-Qaeda's on the run, Al-Qaeda's resurging, Al-Qaeda has to be taken on, Al-Qaeda's been defeated, Al-Qaeda's on the run. See what I'm saying? We just the same little reporting cycle that has more to do with the news cycle on Fox or MSNBC or the New York Times than it ever had to do with what they were doing. Because they've never understood who these people were because they were told not to by the Brotherhood. Because remember, General McMaster told the president this has nothing to do with Islam. Now when the National Security Advisor says that an enemy who kills because they seek to implement Islamic law according to Islamic law, let's just say only 5% of Muslims believed in that. But they're doing 100% of the damage to America. Do you see, if you say that, you are telling our collection effort in the intelligence world, the law enforcement, you can't look at what is the stated explicit basis for the enemy in their actions, which is to say, I don't know what our intelligence community does when they do what they do, but it's not intelligence, because intelligence starts with an analysis of the enemy's stated threat doctrine. And he unconditionally states he fights Sharia according to Islamic law to implement Islamic law. And that's true whether they were right about Islam or not. See what I'm saying? And of course you're hearing things that say there's more to this than what we want to believe. So that's an order not to conduct intelligence. I think it's just staggering. So our coalition partner that had bin Laden living 3 blocks away from their West Point. Is that a clue? So this Brigadier General S.K. Malik wrote a book called The Quranic Concept of War. Okay? I want to make it really important. He wrote this as a Brigadier General when he was on the Pakistani Army Chief of Staff, and a guy named General Zia al-Haq wrote the foreword to it, completely approving of it, and a legal minister approved of it, calling it a capital R restatement. Any lawyers here? Saying this was a restatement of the law, which gives it approval. Now, General S.K. Malik could have written this book and had any number of titles, but as Pakistan is an Islamic republic, he could have not have used that title unless that title was approved. Does that make sense? You could not call it that if it wasn't going to be agreed that is what it's going to be, at least from the point of view of the Pakistani military, right? And so this book comes out, and S.K. Malik says, here are the 4 verses of the Quran that define the Islamic basis of war, the Quranic concept of war. From Surah 8:12, I am with you, give firmness to the believers. I will instill terror into the hearts of the enemy. How about this one? Soon we shall cast terror into the hearts of the unbeliever. And those are the people of the book. Who are the people of the book? And Jews. And Zoroastrians, by the way. But not Mormons. Do you know why? Because their revelation came after Islam. Okay. And those are the people of the book who aided them. All that did cast them down from their strongholds and cast terror into their hearts, so that some he slew, all the men, some he made prisoners of, all the women. Let's just take a look at what ISIS was doing when they said they were following Muhammad with the women. And understand, that's the model they followed. Okay, and made you prisoners of their lands and their houses and their goods, and of a land which you had not frequented before, and Allah has power over all things. Does that sound like defensive warfare? Okay. Let not the believers think that you get the better of the godly. They will never frustrate them. Against them make ready your strength, the utmost of your power. Against them make ready. Please remember that. You know what that is? That is the motto. That's on the code. That's on the seal of the Muslim Brotherhood. Against them make ready, and it comes from this verse. Against them make ready your strength, the utmost of your power, including steeds of war to strike terror into the hearts of the enemies of Allah and your enemies and others besides, who you do not know, but whom Allah doth know. Doesn't that sound like kill them all, let God sort them out? Okay. So we have a country who was our ally. This book came out in 1978. Okay? I think 1978, maybe it was 88. I'll look. But saying that this is our concept of war. And they're our closest ally. And because they're such good allies, they have to push people out who's raising the stuff inside the DOD or FBI that's getting in the way of this really good relationship. Okay? So terror struck into the hearts of the enemy is not only a means of end in itself. Once a condition of terror in the opponent's heart is obtained, Hardly anything is left to be achieved. It is the point where the means and end meet and merge. Terror is not a means of imposing a decision upon the enemy. It is the decision we wish to impose upon him. The rape gangs in public. Why will women convert to Islam at a fast rate? Because the men won't protect them and they want to be safe. And when they do that and you talk about Scripture, they'll say, God ain't protecting me here. And that's going to be what you're going to have to accept right there at the point of attack. Okay? And I would argue, and I won't argue, never mind. So, terror cannot be struck in the heart of army merely by cutting its lines of communication, depriving it of its will to withdraw. It is basically related to the strength or weakness of the human soul. Faith is destroyed. Psychological dislocation is temporary. Spiritual dislocation is permanent. You know, we don't do the God thing in the Department of Defense anymore because that's just too not politically correct. But what did they just tell you is the main effort? What is the main form of warfare in jihad? What is the central point of warfare? It's a word that begins with S. S, warfare. Spiritual warfare. That's what it is. And we've disarmed ourselves. Okay? To instill terror in the hearts of the enemy is essentially the ultimate analysis to dislocate his faith. An invincible faith is immune to terror. A weak faith offers inroads to terror. Whatever the form or type of strategy directed against the enemy, it must, in order to be effective, be capable of striking terror into the hearts of the enemy. So, all those teenage girls who are unprotected because their fathers have been told to stay their hand because it's just Islamophobia, are they terrified? Are they terrified to go to the police or to be accused of something? Okay? Why are you not outraged by this? Because you elected them, and they're carrying out your will. Now here's what I'm going to tell you. So long as they're doing it, you're not doing something different, you are letting them carry out your will. Okay? We're on Facebook, so I'm not going to say, I said it in a kind of a passive way. Okay? He gets the point. Okay? So, now we're going to talk about the Ikhwan, which is the Muslim Brotherhood, and of course this says, I like to joke, against the make ready, of course, in Arabic it's that way. That's where it says against the make ready. But what does that tell you? That the main effort in jihad is actually something called dawah. The jihad is the violence that gets people to listen to the subversion and penetration group. That is the main effort. The main effort isn't that big battle they're going to fight. It's desiccating you and sucking out your belief in your country, your culture, and your God. So by the time they strike, you're collapsing. Okay? The subversion part, which we think is preparation to the main event. We bombed France before we hit D-Day. That model of warfare is unique to the West. It's unique to America because we are so powerful. We don't think about the other forms of war, which is actually how 98% of warfare has been fought in the history of the world, which is the job is to penetrate and subvert and desiccate. Get people to lose their faith in their God, get them to lose faith in their country, get them to lose faith in their culture, so that when it comes down, they'll say, you might not like us, but you know you will be safe. And if someone comes up to you and puts their hand on you, this 18-year-old girl, we will take them out. And you will be safe. You may be property, but you will be safe. And against that are people who have no answer. And I think that's the way to understand when you go to an interfaith meeting at an Islamic center, which is almost always a Brotherhood-run event, where if you raise a caustic question, they have their shoulder-to-shoulder campaign that says, I think that guy's Catholic, so I'll have the priest get up. I'm not going to answer that hostile question at my mosque. I'll have the priest get up and attack you. I know you're evangelical. I'll have my evangelical get up and attack you. You know what I'm talking about? Everybody knows what I'm talking about. You can't fight the battle until you fight the battle. When the guy with the knife 2 feet in front of you has a knife, don't worry about the guy who's got a bow and arrow 2 miles down the road. And I'm just trying to get people to think this is part of the discussion we have to start having. So here's the Holy Land Foundation document. I'm going to speed through it because I want to get back to some of the main efforts. They say here that they're part of the Islamic movement run by the Muslim Brotherhood. Capital I, capital M. Now we're going to talk about political warfare. This is a political warfare document, okay? And I'll define political warfare later. The movement must plan and struggle to obtain the keys and the tools of this process of carrying out this grand mission is the civilization jihadist responsibility, which lies on the Muslims and on top of them the Muslim Brotherhood's country. That's a counter-state operation, okay? Understanding the role of the Muslim Brotherhood in North America. The process of settlement is a civilization jihadist process. Please understand, if you hear someone say, we only want to come here to settle, remember, they have defined settlement as civilization jihad. Now, you have to understand that that's how you have to define that word. Just like you know that when you hear people talk about tolerance, you have to know that you have to understand it doesn't mean what you think it means. You have to know that. And you have to hold yourself to the conclusion. Even when you say, but Steve, that's my best friend who says that, and they don't think that. And I'll say, yes, they do. Yes, they do. Well, I don't think they know. That's not your problem. Okay? So, the process of settlement is a civilization process with all the word means. The Ikhwan, the Brotherhood, must understand their work in America as a kind of grand jihad, eliminating, destroying Western civilization from within, penetration and subversion, and sabotaging its miserable house by their hands, getting our police not to do their job in protecting people, accusing the rape victim of being an Islamophobe. Okay? This is what they mean. Okay? And believe so that it is eliminating God's religion is made victorious over all religions. It is a Muslim's destiny to perform jihad work. Do you see why the FBI wants to tell you this document really doesn't mean what it says? Even though they're the ones that seized it in a raid, the Justice Department translated it, and it was the document that got the convictions, because the judge said so, that went to appeal and then went to the Supreme Court and upheld. Okay? Do you see that these are the people who do outreach with our DHS, our sheriffs, our local police? And do you see, at some point, we cannot be understanding about how they're so confused they didn't get this. Because at a certain point when your job is to support the population, your job is to know what they have to protect them against. That's right. And if you don't know that, you're not right for the job. And if you do know it, you're not, we'll just stop there. Okay? But you need to start thinking much more seriously about this than people do. This is going to become deadly serious. Okay? So against them make ready your strength to the utmost of your power. There's that quote, and that's where it comes from. And of course, we know these are the organizations that spun out of them, right? We've all seen that, so I'm not going to spend much time on it. So let's take a look at the San Bernardino case. From the beginning of that event to the end, the message was controlled by the Muslim Brotherhood. I want to show you this. This is how messaging works. Here you had CARE, okay, on CNN, MSNBC giving press conferences before the FBI came out and said what happened. Remember that? I have to tell you that is actually strange. And it's what established the narrative of how it was going to be talked about. Is that not strange? People understand that's not normal. I mean, if someone who is a Reformed church person goes out and then kills people, the person setting up the discussion and trying to lay a foundation isn't going to be a local minister. It's not. Why are you here? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Okay? So my point is that the message was set right there. That night, Loretta Lynch on a dais came out and said, those who use anti-Muslim speech that edge toward violence. Edge towards violence. Wow, that's a pretty vague statement that she's threatening to bring against people like you. Edge towards violence. That's a pretty broad statement to intimidate an American who has First Amendment rights to say exactly that. Okay? In a situation where a Muslim declaring jihad killed a Jew at a Christmas party, and she said, well, everybody who talks about it that night. But there's more to this. She said this on the dais of Muslim advocates. And it says right there, freedom and justice for all. I know you're thinking Muslim advocates and you're thinking liberty and justice for all, and these are people who are trying to get it right, until you realize, and you can even go to the Muslim Brotherhood's own English language website, freedom and justice is the name of the Muslim Brotherhood when they create political parties. The Freedom and Justice Party. Freedom from the laws of man, justice according to Sharia. So here you have Loretta Lynch on the day of the shooting on a Muslim advocate's dais where it says freedom and justice, threatening anybody who would happen to articulate what happened factually. Okay? Then you had the fact that the mother was a member of the Islamic Circle of North America. And a couple days later, you had Jay Johnson, who was the head of DHS, go to a interfaith at the All Dulles Area Muslim Center, which is run by a guy named Imam Majid, who was the head of Islamic Society in North America. So I want to paint this picture for you. You have a terrorist event where the Brotherhood is allowed to assert the narrative on even, the fair, and balanced. Okay? You have the senior law enforcement officer, the Attorney General. You have the senior counterterror person, Jay Johnson, aligning that way. So you happen to be among the Muslims in America that emigrated here to get away from that. Do you understand that they know that they can never go to the FBI? They can never go to your sheriff because they're signing their death warrant. And I would love to say that these people in these departments are evil, and I think some people might be. Most of them are just too dumb to understand what's going on. I mean, this is, I shouldn't say that. I'll retract it. This is an official retraction for people recording. But you have to start scratching your head and say, what's going on here? Do you understand that if that's our relationship, no Muslim who's here not wanting to be a part of this can go to these people? Why don't they report it? Well, because they want to stay alive. Well, they should be brave. Well, none of you are brave in telling your FBI not to do this. So that's how that goes. Here, do not talk to the FBI, build a wall of resistance. So we've been completely reduced to incoherence. We've been completely defeated in the information battle space. We can't even talk about America using the language of America to explain it to our own children in our lifetime. Isn't that bad? Isn't that we have to start taking account of that as part of the issue? So, introduction to political warfare. I don't want you to read all this thing. This just came out a week ago because I'm saying, really, how does this not raise red flags? Newly discovered likelihood that Mueller investigation began under false pretenses. I think we know that now, don't we not? Okay? Against the backdrop of FBR surveillance and wiretaps that were obtained through materially, meaning lying, false representation. Do we know that now? Okay? To a FISA court, a federal judge, lying to a federal judge. And against the backdrop of an original plea by a federal judge who was also the approving FISA judge for the wiretap. Is that not a conflict of interest? Okay? And the judge was summarily recused from the case. I will stop there. Is this something that we expect in America that we grew up in? Or is this what we talked about, what happened in places like Russia and Germany? It's here. It's not tomorrow. It's now. Now, I don't want to sound like I'm raising the red flag, but I'm saying people need to start seeing things in real time and start thinking that there's that near event that we'll have to respond to. Because we could get run over. This is a book I want people to look at. 1999 is when it was put in English, Unrestricted Warfare. It was a book written by two Chinese colonels at the Chinese War College. Okay? It's important I say 1999 because, of course, 9/11 was 2 years later. Whether it be the intrusion of hackers, a major explosion at the World Trade Center, or a bombing attack by bin Laden, have we seen all this? Have we seen all of this? Okay? All of these greatly exceed the bandwidth frequency understood by the American military. What are the Chinese saying? America has no clue about political warfare. They know how to maneuver tanks on the battlefield. They know how to get an air force to hit a strike target. But they don't know anything about how to strategically understand things. Do you think the Russians know that? No. Do you think the Chinese know that? They wrote a book on it. Do you think the Iranians know that? Do you think our allies know that? Yes. I would say they do. Our allies. Okay. Do you think that Al-Qaeda knows that? Do you think the Brotherhood knows that? Okay. I used to joke that I said, when Brotherhood people go meet in our, like at the FBI, they wait to clear the cameras before they start laughing. And I said that metaphorically, and someone told me confidentially, actually that's true. This is deadly serious though. Okay. So what are they saying is America's national security elites are clueless. $1 trillion later. How many people think we've won anything in the Middle East? Okay? And we can't even, you go to the senior military leaders and talk, you say, when do we win? And the first discussion you have is, well, modern war is really not about winning. That's so gauche. But then you say, well, my son or daughter died. I would call that a loss, okay? I would call $1 trillion that could have been built every bridge in America a loss. But I want you to understand, when they're talking to you that, they're insulting you. And they don't understand that. They think this is strange, okay? This is because they have never taken into consideration and have even refused to consider means that are contrary to tradition and to select measures of operation other than military means. So long as you give them battles in the Middle East to fight and win, because nobody can take on those forces, we're going to focus over here on how to get them to misfire every time they do it. Empty victories. Where did everybody learn that? They learned that in the Vietnam War. I'm trying to remember the name of the Army colonel who, but we at least created a South Korean state. But the point is taken. But the colonel, he used to teach at the War College. He goes up to GIAP, General GIAP, who was the senior North Vietnamese colonel. He goes up to GIAP and he said, General GIAP, what do you think about the fact that we won all those battles? And he said, what do you think about the fact that we won the war? And if we won the war, your victories were irrelevant. Do you see what I'm saying? We need to get our hands around the fact that the way our people think about war is itself wrong. And it's now becoming existentially dangerous. It's now right in Detroit. Okay? So, the main effort in political warfare is to stage strategic information campaigns at the political warfare level, using the war on terror. Win the war by denying you the ability to identify him, thereby allowing him to control you. You cannot defeat an enemy you will not define. Sun Tzu, 600 BC. Tactics without strategy is defeat, is the noise before defeat. How do people understand that intuitively? That's where we're at right now. Okay? A SOCOM general, recently, Special Operations Command. We do not understand the movement, and until we do, we are not going to defeat it. We have not even defeated the idea. We do not even understand the idea. So 15 years into a war, $1 trillion later, thousands dead. It's not just that was stated. I was briefing that 10 years ago. I was briefing it 12 years ago inside the Pentagon. Okay? It's that so lost are we that we would utter it publicly. Do you understand how... Did you understand this goes, oh, okay, we don't understand the enemy. So who did you kill? Who did you kill? Well, we fought the evildoers. Who are they? Did we say the evildoers when we said we're going to go after the 3rd Division of the Nazi Panzer Unit, blah, blah, blah? Okay. So are we lost? On the Maoist counter-state in the Muslim Brotherhood, the people are the sea. Mao Zedong said the people are the sea that the revolution swims in. The chief jurist of the Brotherhood, the awakening is a tributary that supplies and reinforces the movement. This is political warfare. Okay? If I were an intelligence officer, let's make up this mythical country right next to Germany. A free country, has a constitution, has a free press. And we said 90% of the media there is against their elected president, and it's vicious, and it's undermining them, and they're actually using narratives about Russia that have now been exposed not to be true at all. Will we say that's fake news? That makes you feel good. Or will we say that's a propaganda campaign? That's a narrative that's being imposed. Okay? We would call that agitprop, agitation and propaganda, will we not? So fake news is okay if you're talking about an event, but when you can put this stuff in a process, you have to start using political warfare language, do you not? Okay? Because this is people got this translated. We worked very hard, and they'll never admit that we're the ones that pushed it. This book that was written and given to all officers down on a Latin American country, only a coalition of Marxists and Islamists could destroy the United States. They were not talking about a theoretical, ethereal kind of we're going to do things together. They were talking about an alliance. Okay? Does anybody get the sense that they see that? That if you go too hard at CARE, the Southern Poverty Law Center comes after you? Okay? Do you think that's just kind of like a random event? Okay? So, political warfare is about the counter-state and competitive analysis. What happens? You have means to fight a war. People, technology skills, weapons, propaganda, media, finance. You then array them through lines of operation. A political line of operation, a violent line of operation. We'll say Antifa, ISIS, Al-Qaeda. A non-violent, we could say Southern Poverty Law Center. We could say the Muslim Brotherhood. We could talk about allies. The fact that the left is aligned. We could talk about how they operate in the international sphere. Okay? And they orient all those to an end state. Well, if you can see they're doing that, don't you have to then answer that threat? I'm told, somewhat reliably, that we teach political warfare at the National Defense University to foreign military officers, but they don't teach it to American officers. Okay? So, here's the point. So, in this kind of thing, we talk about the war on terror and terrorism and violence from the violent. But when you see a political warfare regime and you can start allocating things you're seeing to this and it starts to fit, then it starts to fit tight, then you realize that the violent actor is the splinter actor. And they're in support of the non-violent actor, the counter-state effort. And does not the explanatory memorandum say they're in here to penetrate and subvert and get your people to put you in jail for them? To get them to deflate and make meaningless the First Amendment for them? Okay? So I just want to say this is why we're looking at this model. So, the narrative control. The very way we talk about the current situation ensures that we are not able to effectively engage it. For example, the war on terror. Leaderless jihad, human terrain, violent extremists, lone wolf, it's all nonsense made to sound scientific and analytical. It's nonsense. It's a rat hole. Okay? Because when you're saying violent extremists, you're not saying declare jihadi. And when you say declare jihadi, you might have to look at their stated threat doctrine and actually allocate resources to fight that. When you say violent extremists, you're going to bring in a sociologist to talk about whether it's declared or not declared, and all this nonsense. Okay? All speak of behavioral models that explain motivation. This is the Oprah trap. The Oprah trap is to get to an explanation for why did someone do something. I think everybody in this room is married to somebody right next to them or close who could say, I've been married to this person for 30 years and sometimes I don't know what they think. Once you start getting into the non-answerable question, why did Hitler do that? You're not getting into the question of the fact that Hitler is doing it, how do we stop it? And I might never be able to resolve why he did that. But if that gets in the way of me deciding to stop it, well, it won't matter. I'm telling you, the very discussion to talk about motivation that way is itself just simply wrong. And it is itself a giant suck, okay? So, in doing so, cause and fact explanations are replaced by sophistic narratives. When watching reporting after an event, note the struggle to oppose narratives that address real events in theoretical terms. Well, I know, Skip, on news, I'm making up the ZNN, or the Almost Fair and Balanced. I'm making up theoretical ones because I'm not bringing up the real names. Well, Skip, I know that they declared this, and we're going to spend an hour talking about this, but do you associate this with would you call this a violent extremist, or would you call it a lone wolf? Well, I don't know. Let's get some from the University of wherever. He's a counterterror expert who's an anthropologist. The human terrain models for the U.S. Army is based on anthropology. I kid you not. I wish I was joking. I mean, how many people feel they're not being told the facts of Las Vegas? Okay, so the terminology we use is disjointed, disconnected, and isolated. Fake news, deep state, holdovers. Obama holdovers in the slide. Okay, the Mueller investigation. When they're actually replacing known language, propaganda, counter-state, splinters, delegitimization operations. Okay? That are made much more clear when you realize they're part of the political attack vector. Okay? Now, I will say, I think the Muslim Brotherhood's main strategy in taking down the West is realizing that this politically correct cultural Marxist narrative in the 1980s, when they created the word Islamophobia, and let me be clear, the word existed before then, when they tailored that phrase to this purpose, okay, that they created the word Islamophobia to sit next to racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, because they weren't that powerful in the 1980s, and they could get the left to do their work. But they had already assessed that this was going to bring down the West. in the 1980s. Who was president in the 1980s? Ronald Reagan. Okay? So all I'm saying is, I think that we need to make ourselves look at things this way. So, non-kinetic attacks are the basis of the threat's main effort. It executes at the political warfare level, targeting control and decision making. If I can control the person who makes the decision, who gives the order to pull the trigger, can I basically make sure the person pulling the trigger doesn't get it right? And if you're focusing only on the downrange stuff over there, are you missing maybe the point where the Brotherhood said their effort was here to penetrate and subvert? Okay? Can everybody hear me, by the way? Okay. Through control of narratives used to analyze and discuss the threat. So let's take a look at some of these splinters. We have the Muslim Brotherhood. ISIS and Al-Qaeda is the violent splinter. You have the SPLC, Southern Poverty Law Center. We see Antifa turning up on narratives being driven that way. Okay? So let me give it a different way. Here's how it works. Okay? You have a splinter movement, the SPLC, the nonviolent counter state, which seems very far left. These guys are crazy. They're far left, but we're not going to listen to them. And all of a sudden, you have a group like Antifa do something violent, and then Antifa comes, or SPLC says, well, you have to listen to us. To keep this from happening, you've got to listen to us. It's got a sense of the good cop, bad cop, doesn't it? Well, SPLC, what do you suggest that we do? Oh, we suggest what you stop doing what's getting violent. Right? So, you see how this works, how the splinter supports the narrative? So, here you have it. Is that not exactly what we're seeing in parallel in the Islamic sphere? The Brotherhood, listen, we want to work with you to keep these acts of terrorism from happening. How do we do that? We'll stop doing what they say. And we'll stop it. Submit. Okay? So, now we have something called the Crime Memo that came out this summer, and the Crime Memo basically points to the fact that we do know that groups like ISIS are working and coordinating with groups like Antifa. So if you go to testimony in the 1950s of people who were members of the Communist Party in the 1930s, they will tell you that a Reverend Ward of the Methodist Church was the creator of something called the American Civil Liberties Union, who was a direct report to the Comintern, the Communist International run by the Soviet Union, that also directed the creation of something called the American League Against Fascism. Against Fascism, Antifa. How many people know it goes all the way back to the 1930s in America? Do you find that interesting? Okay. And you could get all that in testimony that's been recorded in congressional documents. So, political warfare drives enforcement narratives. So let's take a look. You see the DHS document, Right-Wing Extremism, Current Economic and Political Climate, Refueling Insurgents, Radicalization and Recruitment, 2009. You see Army West Point's Combating Terrorism Center, challenges from the sidelines, understanding America's violent far right. And of course, now, this year, everybody's shocked. I'm shocked that a West Point graduate was a communist who was freely advertising. That's a t-shirt of Che Guevara underneath his uniform. While we're addressing that document, how about this? Let's take a look at this. The far right represents a more extreme version of conservatism as its political. This is West Point. Okay. As its political vision is usually justified by the aspiration to restore and preserve values and practices that are part of the idealized historical heritage of a nation or ethnic community. See how it's being used in sociological terms? Do you understand when people talk about your belief in sociological terms are taking the upper hand on you? Do you understand that? And that is the goal of that language, which actually oftentimes collapses under its own weight if you actually look at it. Okay? In many cases, these past-oriented perspectives help to formulate a nostalgic and romantic ideological aura which makes these groups attractive for many who aspire to restore to the halcyon days of a clear hierarchy of values. And you see what the target is here? Okay, so how about the State of the Union address and some of the responses to it? That's the same quote there. And here's Jim DeMint. In 2012, Democrats removed God from their platform. Now liberals reject the church, family, military anthem. What I want to focus on is he was quoting a woman named Joy Reid. Church, family, police, military, the national anthem. Trump's trying to call on the tropes of the 1950s era nationalism. The goal of this speech appears to be to force the normalization of Trump on the terms of the bygone era for supporters are nostalgic for. We're talking about the old days and you're stuck in them and you're not forward moving. And it's the same language today. That's the narrative. Okay? But more importantly, how about just a couple months ago? To abandon the ideals we have advanced around the globe, that would be globalism, wouldn't it? To refuse the obligations of international leadership, which would have to supersede your oath to support and defend the Constitution, would it not? Okay? For the sake of some half-baked spurious nationalism, cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems, is unpatriotic as an attachment to any other tribe dogma of the past, the ash heap of history. What do you think he's talking about? Is that part of this narrative? You see how you're just let that ride? Oh, I have too many irons in fire. I'm not going to take up that fight. What I want to do is start keeping track of all the things you weren't going to take up, okay, that you let slide, and all of a sudden that's the dominant narrative. So, wouldn't that thing be the Constitution they're talking about, which is nostalgic? And aren't all people who take an oath are supposed to take an oath to support and defend that triad and nostalgic thing? Okay, including the FBI, including those cadets at West Point. Okay, and isn't that the actual oath they're supposed to take? Some people think I'm talking about something that's really, this is not 10 years from now anymore. So, this book called Freedom of Speech was written by a guy named Shipler. And what I want people to understand is that this is a book that was written for people who want to implement this hostile narrative that is seamlessly integrates the far left and the Islamic narrative at the hate speech code level. That you see your social media imposing on you, right? Okay? So, first they're going to talk about the fact that you're haters versus hate speech, but gosh, while we're creating this dichotomy and forcing the culture, we're going to say, but we have to accept it because of the First Amendment. But once it has been fully locked in, just like we see in Canada and Europe, they're going to say, why do we have a First Amendment to protect this? And by the time they start asking the question, you're not the frog in the fat who could jump out. You're kind of already, you're gone. And they're looking to just consolidate what they have. See how this works? Okay? So what I'm trying to get at is, all we have to do is see that stuff like preventing and responding to hate crimes from international organization in English and Russian, prosecuting hate crimes in English and in Russian, hate crime laws in English and in Russian. I'm trying to get you to understand these narratives aren't coming out of our American system. They're in fact for it. Okay? And once they get our national leaders to use that language, they're in that language. And you have to understand that the first battle you're fighting is the battle of language in a political warfare regime. So here's something. Doesn't this look like college campus radical stuff? Resistance. Who if not us? When if not now? Where if not here? Or this is just racism in Russian. And it talks about the fact that it's this united against fascism, racism, and nationalism. Oh, wait a second here. Nationalism, national identity is the same as being a racist and a fascist. And then you take a close look at it. And I'm going to do it in the next slide because it's even better. Although it's a dark slide. That's not a bad picture. The slide itself is dark. Okay? Is this is the same one, United Against Racism, Fascism, Nationalism. It was put out by the European Union with the support of Open Societies Foundation. But what I'm trying to get you here is, when you talk to people in Europe who are trying to defend being Danish in Denmark, or trying to defend being French in France, or German in Germany, okay, in a non-aggressive, tomorrow belongs to me, I was born German, this is Germany, can we be German? Can we be English? Can we be American? The language those people in those black outfits that are attacking them using is the language which is being put out by a state actor. Okay? Now, I have no personal brook for groups like the Nazis. I don't. I have nothing to say good about the Ku Klux Klan. These are bad people. But in America, if they file a thing to protest, they do it peacefully, they have a First Amendment to do that, do they not? Okay, I'm just saying that is the standard of the law today. I don't have to like them, I completely disagree with them. But when you saw the attack happen in Charlottesville, well, there's kind of indicators that the local law enforcement and local authorities stood back on it. I'm just trying to talk about the fact that we're seeing stuff. Could it have been that? Or could it have been that? I just don't want to go into details about it, but what I'm saying is, we're seeing how this narrative is sliding in. And is this what you expected? Is this how you expected to see everything deflate in front of you without you see it happen, but you can't explain it? But this would be maybe that when President Obama said that we should use the European Union as our model, maybe I'm saying we shouldn't. So I wrote my thesis in 2007. The cost of not understanding the enemy has been high and getting higher every day. It will increasingly be measured by news stories that narrow in on a senior leader's inability to answer basic questions about the nature of the enemy. It will also manifest itself in official responses to terrorist attacks that become progressively less reality-based. I mean, do they even have generals on news anymore explaining the events to you anymore? Nobody listens to it. Do you understand when they use that Pentagon language? It's just babble in a sense. So here we have this guy, Abdul Hakim Belhaj. That's him right there. Number of years back, he was the leader of LIFG, which we designated for completely good reasons, the Al-Qaeda operative cell in Libya. Well, we had the Arab Spring, and everybody who could declare themselves moderate, and we started helping them. And here's Lindsey Graham and John McCain getting an award from Abdul Hakim Belhaj, or it's the other way around, and he'll get very angry with you if you don't understand the big picture like he does. Oh, by the way, Abdul Hakim Belhaj is now the leader of ISIS in Libya. How many people think he had 1 year of moderation? Or he actually just wanted good training and supplies? And how many people think that training and supplies made targeting at Benghazi just brutally accurate? Okay? So my point here is, are these the same people our national leaders are using veteran moderates to bring into America? You know, I was with a Syrian priest. When you take a look at some of the stuff, I'm Catholic, so I don't want anybody to accuse me of being anti-Catholic. When you take a look at the stuff the Catholic Church of America is doing with the Brotherhood, it is just simple, okay? But when you have a Syrian priest, most of the people getting killed in the Middle East are Eastern Rite Catholic. Did you know that? Okay, Eastern Rite Catholic, okay? And so I'm talking to a Syrian priest in America. He's doing some stuff. I'm leaving his name out intentionally. Okay, he said, Steve, do you know 90% of the CRS funds that come to relief in Syria, Catholic Relief Services, goes to the vetted moderate type people who are killing us? And only 10% come to the Christians and the Yazidis and people getting killed? And I said, I didn't know that, but am I surprised? No. Okay. So now what's happening is, you know, there are countries like Egypt, which is a Muslim country, they're seeing that, you know, wait a second here. Those same Brotherhood who are killing Christians in Egypt are also killing Muslims in Egypt. And Muslims who rejected this, they literally kicked the Brotherhood out. But my point here is, do you see that if we're relying on these people to pick our vetted moderates and they all end up at Muslim Brotherhood mosques, do you know who we're bringing over? We're not just bringing over people who are radicalized. We're bringing over people who are radicalized and trained. Okay? That would be my point. Oh, that's just hate, Steve. You're hate. Okay? So, I think that's really important. Countering violent extremism. CVE. How many people heard that term? Countering violent extremism is a different way to look at terrorism. We go to our community outreach partners, like the Muslim Brotherhood, to help us understand violent extremism. Right? And we already saw a couple slides back that DHS wants to use the violent extremism narrative. You know, think about this. If you read articles about violent extremism, the first one has a picture of bin Laden, you know he's dead, okay? But somewhere down in the article, it has to do with people who have a romantic view of the Constitution. Do you ever notice that? Do you know what's extreme? Anybody who would say they believe in the Constitution of the United States. I could do this with anybody who believes in God, but we'll do the United States. Do you know that's extreme? But you know what makes that person a violent extremist? That they would take an oath of support and defend that view, and then do it. That's why returning veterans are every bit, in this analogy, violent extremist is Al-Qaeda. Now what I want you to know is that is what that means. Okay? Well, that's not how we apply it. Well, I'm sorry, I'm not too sure I agree with that. So here we go. Think counterstate and insurgency, the explanatory memorandum. Remember I gave you that? We are here to create a civilization alternative. What's a civilization alternative? Overthrow the order and replace it with ours. Get used to something called facially neutral language. Facially neutral language is language that's pretty neutral. You have to stop and say, what did I just read? Because it sounds moderated. Okay? Explanatory makes most sense in a way ahead, as a way ahead for a nascent counterstate operation. I'm going to say classic double agent operation. Okay? Agent activity. And I don't want you to think James Bond. There's concepts with double agent activity that is into the political warfare matrix. But that's good enough for now. So here, that's just a statement that the Brotherhood is here to establish Islamic enablement of Islam in North America and support a global Islamic state wherever it is, right? That's their document, admitted to a federal court of law. I don't have to prove anything more. So here you have Congressman Call signing a little thing to Mustafa and the Council of American Islamic Relations, the moderate Muslim is our most effective weapon. I would actually disagree with that in theory, if in fact the moderate they were talking to wasn't a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. But you see who owns the language of moderate Islam? The Brotherhood. Okay? They do it better than other people. So that's now McCall was the head of what? The House Committee on Homeland Security. So we had the events of Oklahoma. He was so energized by that, he decided to put these bills out that passed in the House, got stopped in the Senate, called Countering Radicalization Act. And he says, and I highlighted it here, the attack perpetrated by radical Islamist terrorists is a sobering reminder that radical Islamists are targeting our country and our way of life. That is why I introduced and the House passed the Countering Terrorist Radicalization Act. You see, the act itself doesn't have the word Islam in it anywhere. I would like to say they could have used the word Muslim Brotherhood. That would have been even more accurate. Okay? But let's take a look at why I think this is so bad, why it's so important to understand counterstate activity, and why it's so important to understand that no matter how much they make it sound smooth, this is bad. Okay? Because radical only appears twice in the bill, and both of them are in the title. Islam doesn't appear in the bill once. Not once. Okay? More importantly, there were two bills that went forward. It's true there as well. Now, I'll just for due diligence purposes, I look up the word radical, extreme, Islam, Islamist, Ikhwan, Brotherhood. It's not in there. Okay? So that CVE bill has nothing in it about Islam at all. Right? Now, this is why it's important. This is Title 18 of the United States Code defines what terrorism actually is. Now I want you to understand why this is so dangerous. And you have to make yourself understand this the way I'm going to understand it, because there's a principle of law. If something can be understood a certain way in a legal document, it means that. And it may be that it's in there and they'll wait 15 years for it to be imposed that way. It may be that they didn't mean it to mean that, and someone else sees it and says, but that's what it means, and it passes. See what I'm saying? This is what both acts say. The term violent extremism means ideologically motivated international terrorism or domestic terrorism, as such terms are defined in Section 2331 of the United States Code. Why is this bad? Because who is managing CVE? Our outreach community partners. Who are the people who are they? Well, you have all sorts of groups to kind of clutter the background, but who are the main players? Muslim Brotherhood. So you're giving the Muslim Brotherhood the determination to call someone a extremist, okay. But we see all these indicators that it certainly can apply to you. Okay? Especially if you have a romantic view of the Constitution. Okay? Do you see that? So I would say the minute they define violent extremism this way, They allow the counter-state to attack Americans for standing up for America inside the United States. And you have a national law enforcement establishment and a congressional establishment that is so, I'll just stop with witless because we could get into other rationales that just get people in trouble, okay? But that are so witless they don't understand that they're doing it because they don't understand political warfare and they don't understand that when you give the counter-state the ability to go after people with that language, that's dangerous. And it got stopped in the Senate because there was an intense effort to get people aware of that. So how many people don't understand what I'm saying there? How many people see this kind of, you get it?
I did it.
Okay, you might not remember how I did this 2 days from now. That's okay because this is not easy stuff, okay? This is stuff that has to filter through a couple times. It's not easy. Actually, let me rephrase it. It is so easy they could teach any 18-year-old. But you grew up in a world that doesn't do these kind of things. You grew up in a world that doesn't think this way. So the hard part of this is to get yourself to force a conversion to this way of thinking when you're looking at them. You know what the word tolerance means to you. But when you're listening out there and you hear them use that word, you're not allowed to listen to what they said defining tolerance the way you define it. Because you'll end up somewhere. And it's not going to be threat focused. So, terrorism versus violent extremism. They're not the same. CVE legislation institutionalizes a competing parallel statutory basis for terrorism that you allow third parties to navigate. How many people like this? This is really scary. This is actually Orwellian. Okay? Okay. Terrorism focused on facts and demands evidence. Violent extremism conforms to narratives arising from stuff outside the statutory framework. Violent extremism repositions terrorism to conform to the CVE narrative designed to subsume the counter-terror effort, to postmodern constructs that define meaning outside the U.S. statutory framework as well. The CVE does not enhance the counter-terror effort, it replaces and subverts it. Okay? Is that not what you see? When you have an imam come on TV to explain to you what you're allowed to know when somebody kills a Jew at a Christmas party, and then has the chief law enforcement officer on a very friendly Muslim brother deist say they're coming after you if you happen to say anything about it, where the other main domestic counter-terror player goes to an interfaith thing at the other leader's thing, and you wonder why a Muslim will never come forward to our law enforcement and report something? I will tell you why they won't, because they'd be crazy to. And here's the thing. They're not reacting to something unfair. They're reacting to the fact that this is happening and you're sleeping. This makes you have to make decisions that force you out of your comfort zone. And I'm telling you, I'll tell you personally, you lose friends. Steve, I know that they said that, but they don't actually mean it. Okay? So what I want to do, because I'll wrap it up here. This is part of the lexicon that came out of DHS a couple years ago. This is the DHS's Domestic Terrorism and Homegrown Violent Extremism Lexicon, the language they use. President Trump recently ordered that this language be put back in. Okay? I will tell you, I think one of the reasons I was removed first under the Bush administration was I was pointing out this language was disappearing and it was purposeful. Okay? Our counterterrorism lexicon doesn't have the word Islam, Muslim, Qaeda, or Hamas, or any of the variations of it. So in a situation where that counts for an awful lot of terrorism, how could they not be there? How could they not be there? My point to you is, do a word search and go to a bibliography of a big book on terrorism. And if you go to a bibliography and they're not quoting books they're not quoting Ayman al-Zawahiri. Well, Steve, why would I quote Ayman al-Zawahiri? Well, because he is the head of Al-Qaeda. Sometimes, as Winston Churchill said, the enemy has a say in the war. And our leaders think they're so smart that they don't have to understand them because they have metrics and platforms and understandings that allow them to, in a metric kind of way, fight a war and not have to know the enemy. And you know who knows that? Well, I showed you that quote from the Chinese colonels. Everybody who wants to destroy America. And so I will tell you, it is so important that we know this. It's important like America depended on it. So with that, I would like to just show CVE. Here's the OIC, the Islamic Organization of Islamic Cooperation. The OIC has been committed to violent extremism for over 20 years. Okay? Here is the Organization for Cooperation and Security in Europe. America is a member of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They're doing CVE. They're doing CVE. What I want you to understand, there's nothing about the CVE that comes out of the American legal system. It is being brought from afar. And I would just like our national political leaders to at least acknowledge the fact that when they impose these standards, when the Muslim Brotherhood created the word Islamophobia in 1988 to sit next to racism, sexism, homophobia, Islamophobia, and the OIC, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, made that their theme, they were going to enforce that as law, that when a member of your legislature accuses you of Islamophobia, they're imposing a hostile foreign legal standard against an American citizen inside the United States. And when your social media decides they're going to impose European Union hate speech laws in America against an American citizen, they're doing the same. You see how that works? All that nameless and faceless. That's all I really wanted to do, is just show you, whether it's from the left, it's all happy CVE until it's not. It's all happy CVE until it's not. So all I'm trying to say is that we need to start watching this stuff, because that's how it's happening. With that, I think I'll stop and we'll open it up to questions if we have time.
Thank you, Steve.